G'day everybody and welcome back to another episode of Safari Mack Explores Australia. I'm Safari Mack, your guide and host, helping you make connections to the wild. Well, ladies and gentlemen, here we are in New South Wales. No, we're not hanging out here in Sydney, Australia, though it is a popular tourist attraction. We're heading over to the eucalyptus forests of New South Wales as well as basically Eastern Australia to look at one of the world's most iconic of all Australian mammals, the koala, otherwise known by their Latin name of Phascolarctos cineris. Forgive me if I'm not pronouncing it correctly. Now, I know that these guys are cute, or they seem to be cute, but don't be fooled. These guys are still wild animals. So we're going to now go ahead and get into their lives. But before we begin, if you're new to my channel, hit that like and subscribe button. Check out my Facebook page for content on conservation. And if you have a question or if there's an animal that you want me to do in the future, you just have to send me an email, which you will always find the link to down in my description below. But if you're ready, I'm ready. Let's begin. Now, the koala, of course, is a fairly unusual mammal, like most animals in all of Australia. But this guy is just flat out, whoa. Here's what I mean, especially in terms of their family and their evolution. Now, it's not so weird that they are a member of the marsupial family, where babies grow up in a pouch. That's not what's weird about them. It actually would happen to be their closest cousin, the wombat. So yeah, believe it or not, these guys are in fact related to the wombat. Of course, unlike the wombat, these guys spend most of their lives in the trees. Now, let's get into the backstory of their evolution. At least 45 million years ago, or close to that time, Australia was breaking off from the southernmost continent of Antarctica. As it started to, pull apart and go its own way, strange koala-like mammals were the koala's earliest ancestors. But as time passed, it's thought that these animals would start to look more like their modern-day counterparts around 25 million years ago. Now, thanks to biologists, we've been able to identify 3 different subspecies of koala, which include the Queensland koala, the New South Wales koala, and the Victorian koala. But for today's episode and all of its purposes, we're just going to focus on koalas as a whole. Now, let's get into their habitat, their lifestyle, and their reproduction. Now, of course, we know koalas are basically found only on the continent of Australia, but their habitat is very limited to mostly eastern Australia. But at one point, it was thought that there were koalas in the western part of the continent. However, it's more likely that the Aboriginals would eventually hunt those guys into extinction from the western side of Australia, and they would make their home more present here along the southeastern part. So, they are known to hang out mostly in areas where there are plenty of different gum trees, or what you and I would know as eucalyptus trees. So whether it's densely forested or more woodland-like settings, wherever they can find enough food, they will call it home. But they're not really a rainforest animal, as it might seem. They're more likely to look for the dry, coarse vegetation-like areas. So, not really a rainforest, but they are more likely to be at home here in this kind of setting. Now, these guys, despite being popular at zoos living with others, koalas are generally fairly solitary animals. But that's not to say that maybe one tree might not hold a few koalas. That depends on something that we'll get into on part 2 next week. Now, the koala usually lives, as I said, they live alone, but males will establish territories, and they do not tolerate one another at all, and they will fight each other very much to keep their territories intact as a way of attracting the females to come and reproduce. And so, when it comes to reproduction, it is fairly weird. I mean, it is weird. So for starters, they fight with one another and they cause a ruckus. So you probably are thinking, do koalas sound all cute and cuddly? Not really. I've listened to koala vocalizations, and it's more like this. something a little more deep and more guttural. So it's like when you see this little guy, and then when it starts making that noise, it's gonna make you jump for a minute. I can tell you, when I first heard it, I was just like, okay. So that's the koala. So the koala males will mate with the females and they are pretty sexually dimorphic, as the females are generally smaller than the males. After gestation period of around 35 days, mom gives birth to a single joey, though sometimes two have been recorded, but that's rare. And there's another thing that I'll go into at a much later time. But when she gives birth, just like our friend the kangaroo, she does not really do anything to help the baby except kind of help stay perfectly still so that this tiny little joey that's just born crawl all the way from where he came out all the way into the pouch where he or she, or at least what we will call the joey, will latch on to mom's teat and will suckle for the first 6 months until it starts to look a little bit more like its parents. But then, even as it starts to exit the pouch and explore the world around him, and of course come back to mom to find safety in the pouch, they'll continue to suckle on mama's teat until they reach 1 year old. Once they're fully grown, they're sent on their way and they begin to find their own place, either in another patch of forest, or the males will begin to establish their own territory and find their own food supply. Speaking of which, let's now go into the diet. And I would just like to give you all a fair warning. What I'm about to tell you, part of it might be extremely gross, but this is part of what I've learned about koalas in general. So it's pretty safe to say that koalas eat nothing but eucalyptus, one of the most toxic plants in all of Australia. But these guys eat and eat and eat. And you know, we probably have heard that koalas sleep a long time, right? Similar to lions. They sleep around 18, 20 hours a day. Now, you're probably thinking, are they just being lazy, or are they trying to escape the heat? It's not really so much of that. It's been discovered that mostly plants usually don't always have a lot of protein, or in the eucalyptus's case, they don't exactly have a whole lot of energy levels to give the koala energy. So eating all that food, it's not only toxic, which they've developed a way to be able to deal with it, they're just trying to get through the whole day as they're trying to sleep off all the food that they just ate. And they're not just eating it one leaf at a time, but they're grabbing whole bunches. Now here comes the part that's a little gross. Now, 6 months so let's say we had a mom that gave birth to a little joey. 6 months have passed, right? And so it's ready. Now, it starts to explore the world around him. However, there's a little bit of an unusual twist. So the koala has to prepare her baby for being able to handle this highly toxic plant. So how does she do it? Well, thankfully, this kind of, what I'm about to tell you that's super gross, only takes 10 days. It only happens for at least 10 days. And then after that, the joey starts to eat eucalyptus like its mom. But it actually eats a kind of substance that's called pap that originally comes from its poop. That's right, you heard me correctly. The baby will eat part of mom's poo, which we call pap, as a way of starting to accumulate the toxins of eucalyptus in a safe manner. So that way his body can adjust and adapt to the toxicity levels, thus he's able to eat as much as he can. Finally, let's end today's Part 1 episode with their influence in human culture. Now, the koala actually has its name originally from the Aborigine of Daharug, that means no drink. So, as in not drinking any water, as they get most of their water from eucalyptus plants. And of course, another great thing about koalas is, kind of like the panda, they're used as symbols of conservation projects and conservation actions. Well, unfortunately, that's all the time I have for this week, so be sure to join me next week for part 2. But until then, this is Safari Mack. I'll see you out there.